In our last study, we discussed the 7 seals of John and talked about, the scroll that had the 7 seals on it and the 7 witnesses type of thing. And I said, I want to expand on that a little bit. I'm not sure how much I'm going to expand on it because right now I have about 2.5 years worth of stuff ready for you. I got quite a bit going on here. The more I dig, there's another vein, that I get into. But anyway, I wanted to spend a couple of nights studying a couple of things here, and that is the mystical side of the Apostle John. I believe that John was of a school of thought in Judaism that believed in the mystical. Remember, so much of the Old Testament is about visions, dreams, interpretations, about walking in a spiritual vein that we've lost in the Western world today, to a large extent. But not even all of the disciples were trained or taught in the ways of Judaism. I mean, they were Jews, they had been to their training, but they were not rabbis, they were fishermen. They were laymen who attended church. But I believe that there are vestiges in some of the apostles, especially those who wrote the Gospels, that show that they perhaps had some training above and beyond the normal, and that they had insight into theology, and that's why God tapped them and said, I want you to write part of that story. I want you to write part of that story. And I think that John then becomes an important figure because of the mystical. His gospel is so different than the others that we actually give the first 3 gospels a name. We call them the synoptic gospels, which means basically they're synchronized, they're cooperative, they're harmonious, they agree on many points. John's out in the field looking at the stars, while they're writing down the facts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
To me, it's absolutely no coincidence that this would be the man who would be given the revelation of Christ.
Amen to that.
The revelation, because he was the one who understood the interpretive side of Scripture and the symbolic and mysterious side. And so if we look at John's mystical gospel, you have a sheet there that we look at what are some of the differences between the synoptics and John. What are some of the differences? And I've given you some spaces to fill in there that we can take a peek at. Okay, everybody got a sheet that you need? When we look at the synoptics, the first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we see that there are a lot of proverbs and a lot of parables. It's a very down-to-earth teaching. It's a teaching that's a man's kind of teaching, okay? And talks to farmers, and talks of farming, and talks of weather, and talks of the things that men would do in the work that they do. Whereas John has very long discourses. He has whole sermons of Jesus that the other Gospels don't have. And as Jews will do, they question and discuss. A part of the very essence of the learning in Judaism is to question. To question. Don't read it, don't believe it, but question it. Dig deeper and find out what does it mean. We've kind of made fun of Jews in a bit, in that God said, take the Sabbath and keep it holy, and they said you can only walk so many steps. They got so picky-uni about it that they said you can only walk so far, and you can't light a fire, and the fire has to be lit, and you can't cook, and you can't do that, and you can't do this. And how much of this can you do? Well, you can't do that, but you got to stop here. That they got so hung up in all this stuff, into these rules and things like that. Whereas John just says, Jesus, here's the tape recorder, go for it. Mm-hmm. Go for it. Spill your heart. Talk to us. Tell us what you want, okay? Instead of being very small and precise, it's more of a flowing narrative of Jesus. We hear more of the heart of Christ in John than we do the others, okay? And so another thing that comes around is, in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus teaches a great deal on the kingdom of God and its effect on the law. How is this new kingdom that has come? The kingdom has now come and is near you. How does that affect the law? What does that do? It does not replace the law. It doesn't supersede the law. It completes the law. But there's a great deal of teaching on that particular area, okay? Whereas in John's Gospel, he teaches more on relationships. let's not talk about the new and the old. Let's talk about the new relationship. And that's what we do as Christians, isn't it? As Christians, we should be majoring on the new relationship of the New Testament rather than the relationships we had in the Old Testament. And so this building upon this relationship, no wonder John was the one who put his head on the bosom of Jesus and was in the last lines of the gospel. This was written by the one who was beloved of Christ. All about the relationship with God. Let's not worry about the kingdom and the law and what we have to keep and what we don't keep. Let's talk about having a relationship with the Father. Okay? He talks, Jesus, in many times, is totally incomprehensible to the crowd in the 3 synoptic gospels. I mean, he writes about the fact that the people look at him and going, what are you talking about? What in the world are you coming to talk about? Now, in the end, in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there seems to be a recollection at the end of the Gospels that says, oh, is that what you meant all this time? We get it now, okay? So there is a coming to understanding. It's not like Jesus left them in the dark and said, I got a mystery and I ain't telling you the answer, good luck, okay? No, that wasn't it at all. But in John, instead, he is just flat out misunderstood. I mean, they just misunderstood. And there's sarcasm in John, there's irony in John, there's let's go throw him off the hill in John, I mean, there's just this almost a competitive aspect, a combative aspect in some of the discourses of John. Jesus speaks, the crowd rails against him, and Jesus comes back. He doesn't walk away as a lamb often in John, okay? He confronts his critics and takes them straight on. That's very different than the first 3. In the synoptics, we also find that the greatest commandment is love your neighbor and love your enemies. This is the greatest command that you can possibly have. In John, the final command, the last thing I have to say is, I give you love one another. This is the last thing I have to say to you. It goes from being a legal aspect of the greatest, this is what you need to do, to listen, if there's one thing I want to leave with you all, love one another. That's a real difference and emphasis in the way that John expresses the exact same message. That rather than it be a command that is a legal thing that has to be followed, it is more of a relationship thing. And the last most important thing. In the 3 Gospels, crucifixion is seen as a burden. It's a hardship. It's something that we want to get away from if we possibly can. That Jesus is shouldering this heavy, heavy burden. But he knows that there's a greater cause. He knows that. In the Gospel of John, crucifixion is an exaltation. It's a celebration. It's a I am doing this for the salvation of many. If I don't do this, it ain't getting done kind of concept. So John, again, takes that personal, finished relationship. Yeah, please.
Why final exaltation? I would think...
Well, I mean, the final exaltation in the book, in his gospel.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here saying, no, I should be...
The resurrection? Yeah. Yeah, the resurrection. No, but he sees it as, if I don't do this, you don't get to do what I have in mind for you. This is my final act, paying your price. Paying your price. And that rather than being a burden of, I know this is for everybody's good, but I'm really not looking forward to it, John shows him practically running towards the cross. I mean, it's symbolically, metaphorically going towards it with his head held high and not being beaten, not being, the passion of Christ, but instead seeing this as a victor who knows how the end of the book is written. Totally different aspect, a different viewpoint of this whole thing. Finally, the entering of the kingdom of God now in the 3. The kingdom is here. His kingdom is here. We say there's not a lot of eschatology. Eschatology means that which is to come. There's not a lot of eschatology in those 3 books when we talk about the kingdom. But John, on the other hand, says all of this means that eternal life can be realized right now. Eternal life is yours. I mean, just think of John, the 3rd chapter. John, the 3rd chapter says, yes, you can have it now. You can have it now. And so, over and over and over again in the book of John, there's a totally different viewpoint of this. And it's the viewpoint of a dreamer, one who sees beyond the words, one who reads between the lines, the one who hears the still small voice of God and says, this is it, walk ye in it. This is it, okay? And so we see that. In the Synoptics, we see that there are many statements by Jesus himself and that he is verified by miracles. He has the stamp of approval of miracles in what he says. Jesus says, if you don't know me, you don't know the Father. Many, many things are said by Jesus in the Synoptics. In John, there are actually 7 I am statements that are the I am, the great Hashem, Yahweh, I am, that is spoken. And there are the 7 signs, and there's much symbolism. I was taught that there were 7 sevens in the book of John. That's what I've believed my whole life, is that there are 7 sevens in the book of John. That the book of John has this symbolic, mystical connection with the number 7. Right now, I'm on 14 sevens, okay? I have found 14 lists of sevens in John, and that's why I say it may take us a while to get through these, but we won't drag our feet in them. But the 7 statements of I am. There is no book in the Bible that declares the divinity of Christ as firmly and as strongly as the book of John. It just nails it to the wall and says, deal with it. Okay? And most of it comes out of the mouth of Christ. Most of it is him speaking in the Gospel of John. And so what a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the signs that we're talking about is one of the things we're going to look at tonight. We're going to look at the 7 signs of Christ's divinity. The 7 signs of Christ's divinity in the Gospel. So we'll look at that. So the enemies in the Synoptics included people who were mentioned. Matthew, Mark, Luke actually say, and now comes the Pharisees. Here comes the Sadducees. The Pharisees and Sadducees are ganging up. The Herodians are here. The chief priests are here. The high priest is here. They name names. Okay? They actually point out. Why? Because they are written to people to think as people, men's men and workers and the flesh. Whereas the symbolic John says, and the Jewish authorities came against him. He just took all of the authorities and said, it is not Judaism that's the problem, it's these false leaders that are the problem. And that's incredibly important. Remember, the priesthood was supposed to be an inherited tribal thing that was passed on from tribal, blessings, that you, the Levitical group, you, the Judah group, will be the praise group, and the Levites will be the priests, and the priests will be given this to eat, and they can't eat that, and they will serve in this way, and you are a Levite. But it was primarily during the captivity that the priesthood began to fall apart. And that we intermarried with other people. The Jews intermarried, and they got scattered, and so the Levites, we became scattered, and all kinds of things began to happen in history. And when they came back to the temple then, they were still a vassal state. They were still under the rule of someone else. And so now the priests bought their rights to be the priests. They went to the Greeks and said, I want to be a priest in the temple, and what can you do for it? Because I'm a Greek and I could care less about this Judaism and Hebrewism and Old Testament stuff. It's just, I need some people to ramrod these people around, and what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And so when Christ comes on the scene, there is no doubt that the Levitical group has been replaced by purchased authorities. It is the leaders now who are buying their way into the priesthood. Okay? They are not of the tribe that should be of the priest. They are just purchased and buying their way through. And how much authority, how much respect can Jesus have for usurpers of the authority of the house of God? And so this is what he speaks against, is these folks. It's not the law he's speaking about. It's not the tradition of the Jews. It's not the symbolism of the Jews. That he came to fulfill every jot and every tittle. But it's this false leadership. And it's John that points that out the best, that really nails that. The 3 Gospels actually tell us that there was a zealot among the group, which was an accepted party in Judaism at the time of Christ. We think of zealots as little rebels running around with knives in their belt that were stabbing people in the streets if you watch Bible movies at all. But the zealotes were an actual party. They were a party of Judaism that had their own synagogues. And they met together. And their purpose was incredible nationalism. They were the nationalists, the patriots, let's make sure that we get rid of the Romans, and let's get rid of the Greeks, and let's get all the Persian influence out of here, and Israel for Jews and Jews only. Let's do that. All right? And so when we've got this Jew for Jew's sake, he sees Jesus as the one that's going to slap the snot out of the Romans and get them out of here. He's seeing that as a possibility. Jesus had other plans. Jesus had other plans about that. John does not go into that. Instead, we see that John spends most of his time, again, I'm drawing comparisons for you, that many of the scenes lead to a dialogue where Jesus is saying, you've asked me this question, but let me ask you this. And he takes off for long, long passages. Very different than the other three Gospels, okay? So let's look at John's 7 signs. Let's look at John's 7 signs of Christ's divinity. That should be your second page there. John's 7 signs of divinity, the divinity of Jesus. Excuse me, I'm going to get rid of this frog. I'm going to cough and I'll turn my mic off. Excuse me. All right. I seem to have a piece of pizza stuck right about here somewhere. So anyway, John's 7 signs of Christ's divinity. The first one we find in John 2, 1 through 11. John, the 2nd chapter, the first 11 verses. This is the turning of water into wine at the feast at Cana of Galilee, the wedding. On the 3rd day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Jesus said to her, so what? It's like today, and? Yeah, what does that mean to me? Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour's not yet come. His mother said to the servants, whatever he says, you do. Jewish mother to the end, okay? Now, there were 6 stone water pots that were set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, so they filled them up to the brim, and he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. They knew. The head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, every man, let's see where I just lost my thing when it went that way. Said, every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine, because they're too drunk to know good from bad. But you have kept the good wine until now. This was the beginning of the signs, it says. Signs that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. This is a sign of his divinity, and it's at the beginning when Jesus doesn't think his time has yet come, but evidently the Father told his mother it was, okay? So this is the beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So this is the first of the signs that we see of the turning of water into wine. Now, I believe, and there are different ways to put this, guys. There are many different interpretations of this, and this is just a McClaren interpretation. But I believe that this first miracle was a declaration that he was in control of the natural order of things. That it usually would take a year for the grapes to grow and for them to get to a place where they could be harvested, and then it would take another year or 2 for the wine to be fermented and to be prepared. And so we're looking at a 3-year process for a cheap wine and 5 years for a good wine, I understand. And I don't think there is such thing as good wine, but anyway. So anyway, the wine itself takes years to produce. Years. The natural order is that it has to come from the ground, it has to grow, it has to ripen, it has to be harvested, it has to be plucked, it has to be smushed, it has to be fermented, and we have to wait for that fermentation, it has to age, and Jesus did it all like that. That he is the God over the natural order of things. And again, there are other ways to word that, but I use the word natural order, okay? So the second sign that we see is in chapter 4. Again, all of these are going to be in the Gospel of John, so you don't have to go flip around too far. This whole study is going to be in John. So John 4, verse 46. John 4:46 says, "Therefore he came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine, and there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and was imploring him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, 'Unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe.' The royal official said to him, 'Sir, you're absolutely right, okay? I'm not going to argue with you. But it's my son. It's my boy. Don't put yourself in the story. Make it more than just print on page. I believe this happened just as it's written. I believe it to be literal.' And so he says, 'Sir, come down before my child dies. Come down before my child dies.' Jesus said to him, 'Go, your son lives.' Go, your son lives. The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he took off immediately. This started off means he didn't even look back. He just wheeled and left. Just when Jesus said it, he ran to go see the example. He went to see the result. He knew it had happened. His faith was bang, it's there, it's been done. Okay? The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. And as he was now going down, his slaves met him on the road, saying that his son was living. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, 'Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him.' So the father knew that it was at that very hour in which Jesus had said to him, 'Your son lives,' and he himself believed in his whole household." This is again a second sign. The second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. And so what we have here is we have the healing of the feverish son. The son with the deadly, fatal fever. That he's going to die if something doesn't happen soon. I believe with all my heart, and again we could word it in different ways, but I believe that Jesus was conquering space and distance. That he said, there is no distance and there is no space. I am omnipresent. That I am, when I say I am, it is done. And so he said, go. It's done. Conquering space and distance in that moment. Look at John 5. John 5. 1 through 15. 1 through 15. After these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is in Hebrew called Bethesda, having 5 porches. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, withered, waiting for the moving of the waters. For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then was first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in and was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. A man was there who had been ill for how long?
38 years.
38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, do you even want to get well? Have you become so accustomed to this that you really want to change? Really? Really? You know, we discussed this in my class this morning about, your pastor's sometimes a little controversial on campus. But I said, as a psychologist, I laugh in the face of those psychologists because these are all advanced classes. By the way, these are my sharp sophomore kids that are ready to graduate. I said, I really laugh in the face of the psychologists who say that addiction is a disease. I said, the majority of psychologists will say that addiction is a disease. And I said, that is the biggest lie we've been sold in drug rehabilitation. That addiction is a disease. All right? And so I've got 2 or 3 that stop writing and go, what? been told addiction is a disease. And I said, you will find if you go in to be a drug counselor or rehabilitation counselor, or if you go in to be a psychologist and you work with addicts, you will find out something that you all know, and you'll all admit it to me right now if I ask you, and that is, can anyone really get off a drug until they really decide to do it?
No, sir.
No addict is ever going to get off a drug until they decide to do it. Every psychologist agrees with that. And then they turn around and say it's a disease. I said, name one other disease that you can will yourself out of.
Wow. Yeah, that's very, that's spot on.
There is no other disease on the planet that you can will. I'm not going to have cancer and I will it.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I'm not going to have cancer. Tomorrow I'm not going to have tuberculosis. Tomorrow I'm not going to have HIV. You know, come on. Let's get real here, okay? Let's not say one thing out of our mouth, which is you know, nobody's going to get off it until they decide to get off it, and then turn around and say, but we're all helpless and it's a disease and you've got to have pity on those people because they can't help themselves. Give me a break. That just doesn't... In the realm of philosophy, there's no logic in what you just said. Forget theology, forget the Bible. Let's just talk the logic of what you just said and how illogical your thoughts are. You cannot have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You just can't have it that way. And so, did this person really want to get well? Just because he's there doesn't mean he wants to get well. Because have you ever had a broken bone or something like that, and then the doctor says, okay, you got to start using it?
Well,
It's hard to start using it again. I mean, you find yourself favoring it, and you find yourself doing the things left-handed because your right hand was in a sling or in a cast, and you keep doing it that way, and you have to stop and force yourself to use that hand, don't you?
yes.
I remember one time I had something with my foot that was bothering me, and I was you know, I had a little bit of a limp for a couple of weeks, and I was walking with the limp. I was in college, and I was walking with the limp, and I realized one day I was limping and didn't have the pain anymore. I'd gotten so used to the limp that I'm limping and there's no pain, and I'm going, it's gone. Well, for Pete's sake, start walking right then, you know? But I had gotten into such a habitual, you know, conditioned response, we'd say in psychology. But how many times does an addict really want to get well? How many people do we know that maybe are on welfare, and do you really want to get off welfare?
Right, same thing.
Do you really want to get a job? Do you really want to work? We'll work for food. Really? Come on, I got a place that'll put you to work right now, you know? Do you really want to get off of welfare? Do you really want to be... Because sometimes this becomes a habit, right? It becomes a habitual thing. That's not to pick on people who are on welfare and stuff, but when given the opportunity, will they take the opportunity? Do you wish to get well? Verse 7 says, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, another steps up before me. Now, that's really not an answer.
No.
If you read that, he really has not answered Jesus. Do you really want to get well? Well, I haven't because I can't get there. Excuse me? You know, that's like saying, well, I'd like the job, but I ain't got no car.
Right.
But do you want a job? Well, I ain't got no car. Do you want to work? Well, I don't have a car. To answer the question, okay? But I believe that, again, Jesus works on the intent of the heart. Right?
Yes, it does.
He works on the intent of our heart. And I think he knew the heart of that man. And the man was saying, I'm doing everything I physically can. I have done everything that I spiritually and soul can. I'm here, but they beat me. They keep beating me. I think the Lord heard his heart. The cry of his heart was, you're darn tootin'. What do you think I'm doing sitting here? He had the heart to be healed. He had the heart to get well. And I believe that with all my heart because Jesus said, get up, pick up your pallet and walk. Pick up your pallet and walk. Immediately, it says, the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. There was no training. There was no working it out. There was no, well, now you're going to be a little weak after 38 years. Take it easy, buddy. No, I mean, you know,
He was helpful.
I've seen faith healers and on the stage say, run across the stage, you've been healed. Run across. I believe that's what happened to this man. Okay? I believe he could run, jump, climb a tree.
Yep.
He picked up his bed and said, I got it, boy, there's nothing, I'm strong as an ox in my legs now. Everything is great. Who is the man, and they asked him, who is the man who said to pick up your pallet and walk? But the man who was healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had slipped away while there was a crowd in that place. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, Behold, you've become well. Do not sin anymore, so that nothing worse happens to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. I believe that this is the third sign of the 7 signs of his divinity. And here he overcame the lame man, healing, overcame time. Time is of no essence. 38 years means nothing. He stood up immediately. He didn't have to rehab. He didn't have to practice. He didn't have to work for months to get his strength back. Do you know what a muscle does that doesn't get used for 38 years? Shrivel and atrophy, yeah. It just shrivels up. But 38 years of not being used. And yet, he picked up it, and the first thing he did was go to the temple. And remember, wherever you are in Jerusalem, the temple's uphill. No, even Bethesda, the pool of Bethesda is just north of the city. And it's you can see the first century porches today. They're 40 feet below you. Remember, Jesus' time is always 30 to 40 feet below your feet when you're in Jerusalem. But you can look down and see those porches. And at that time, they had to go up that 40 feet on steps to get to the Temple Mount, to get to the platform. He had no problem. He was up there worshiping and paying his healing tax. He was worshiping and giving God the glory in what he'd done. And so here we have, I believe, a transition of time, a transportation of time. And he masters time and says, I don't need 38 years to get better. You are better. All right, so our fourth one now. Our fourth one is in 6:1-14. Isn't it amazing how compact all these are? How they're all just boom, 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 boom. And John's going, let me show you, let me show you, let me show you about this Jesus. Let me show you this divinity. After these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs which he was performing on those who were sick. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. There Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these may eat? In other words, we got a crowd here, what are you going to do about it, Philip? Have you planned? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? This he was saying to test him, for he himself knew what he was intending to do. John knows that Jesus knew from having been there. He was there, he was a witness of it. Philip answered him and said, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient, Lord, for everyone to receive just even a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, hey, there's a little pup over here who's got 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Okay? That's it. That's what we can find. But that's not enough for all these people. And Jesus said, have them sit down. Now there was much grass in this place, so the men sat down, in the number of about 5,000 men. Jesus then took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed to those who were seated. Likewise also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were filled, he said to the disciples, gather up the leftover fragments. Get those leftovers and get yourself some baskets, okay? So they gathered them up and filled the 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. Therefore, when the people saw the sign, here's our next sign, which he had performed, they said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. This is he. This is it. I believe that this was a mastering of quantity and volume and mathematics. You know you can only put so much water in a cup unless you're Jesus. And you can only make so much out of 2 fishes unless you're Jesus. And you can only feed so many people with bread. You can only break that bread so many times where there's nothing else to break unless you're Jesus. And so mastery over the very essence of what we know and like, and that is, if I see it, that's the truth. That's how much is in the cup. When I drink it, it's gone. Unless he's there. And so the very concept of mathematics is ruled by God.
Oh,
The
yeah.
very concept of volume and quantity is controlled by God. And Jesus said, you better believe it. You better believe it. I got this. So he feeds the 5,000 in this. All right, our next one, 6:15 to 21. 6:15 to 21, our very next passage. And what's he going to do? He's going to walk on water, isn't he? Going to walk on water. This stuff just runs all together, doesn't it? It's like John actually planned to write it this way, doesn't it? Okay, so Jesus, perceiving that they were intended to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. Now when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, and after getting into a boat, they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. It had already become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. Then, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, drawing near to the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I. Do not be afraid." Sorry, that's just really good. That's right. Don't be afraid. It's me. How many times do we need to hear that? How many times do we need to hear that in our lives, you know? Verse 21 says, so they were willing to receive him into the boat. Boy, do you think they were willing? Gee, talk about understatement, John. So they were willing to receive him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. They didn't have to row the rest of the way.
Just there.
Jesus got in and they're on the shore. Did you ever read that before? Did you ever read that they didn't have to row it? I mean, he gets on the boat, they're there. They are just there. Of course, walking on water to me is conquering all of nature. All of nature is mine. I'm not held. Remember, guys, the definition of a miracle, the best definition of a miracle I can think of is when God chooses to break his own laws.
That's it.
I mean, he gives us a law like gravity is a law. And how many of you know there's a law that says you try and walk on water, you don't? It's called the law of sinking. Okay? There are natural orders in the law, in our laws that we are held to. But a miracle is when Jesus says, not this time. Not this time. I'm going to transcend my own law and let you be a part of that. And so this is breaking nature itself, the very nature of man and his relationship with the world. And Jesus is not bound by that at all. All right, we go to 9. Skip a couple chapters here and go to chapter 9. 9, we read the first 12 verses. 9, 1 through 12. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. Okay, so see how John constantly says this many years, this much time, from that time to this time? He's really giving us depth, rather than saying, there's a guy that threw himself in the fire and Jesus fixed him. You know, that's truckers sitting around a cup of coffee saying, well, you should have seen what I saw. But John's going, let me give you some evidence that will blow your mind. Okay? Let me give you a detail that you're going to have to chew on for a while if you doubt this. He was really giving him nuggets as he went along. And so he says, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents. Neither one of them did anything wrong to do this. But it was so that the works of God might just be displayed in him. He must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. And night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he'd said this, he spat on the ground, he made clay of the spittle, he applied the clay to his eyes, and he said, go down there to the pool of Siloam and wash it off, which is translated to be sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. Very simple. John's just taking it like it's everyday occurrence. He goes off, comes back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who had previously saw him as a beggar were saying, isn't this the guy that used to sit over there and beg? Is this the same guy? His eyes are working. I'm having trouble seeing this same guy. Others were saying, this is he. Still others were saying, no, but it looks like him. It's, he's doppelganger. They look alike, but it's not the same. He kept saying, I am the one. Yes, it's me. They kept saying, no, it's not. No, it's not really the one. Looks like it. Going, it's me, Nate. Well, I don't know. It could be him. No, it's me. Do you understand? Hello? Look at me in the eyes. It's me. So they were saying to him, well, how then were your eyes opened? And he answered, the man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received sight. And they said to him, where is he? He said, don't know. Don't know. Don't know.
What do you look like?
I don't know. I'm blind. I was blind, I don't know if he was tall, short, don't know. Spit, I heard that.
Yeah.
Felt the mud, that's all I know, okay? If somebody comes along and puts gas in my car, I'm out of gas on the side of the road, and somebody says, well, who was it? You say, I don't know. They put gas in my car. What kind of car were they driving? Well, it's a nice car. I mean, it was a Chevy or something like that, but did you get their license plate? No. I was so grateful to get the gas, that's all I was grateful for. What do I care? Don't ask me these details. Once I was blind, now I can see. Let's major on the major here. And so I believe that in this case of the blind man, the man who was blind, who was given his sight, that Jesus gives us a clue when he says, there was no sin in what was done, but this was done that God could be glorified.
Amen.
How many of you know that we don't really appreciate the love and the glory of God until we really have to?
That's
Until we really have to. I mean, we could be tripping along and singing a song and everything, and God's kind of in the back of our mind. But boy, when adversity hits, He comes right to the front of our face. Comes right to the front. Now again, that's the sign of immaturity in a Christian.
Yes, sir.
Mature Christian ought to have him at the front of the mind all the time. But an immature Christian thinks of him only when we're in trouble. And evidently this guy was one of those. Okay? A little bit on the immature side. But I think he's going to grow up real fast now that he can see.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now that he's got this miracle, probably things are going to happen a lot faster. He's probably going to have a whole lot more faith in this whole thing. I believe that this was God showing us that Jesus is the master over misfortune and disaster. Misfortune, that's what he said, isn't it? How he described it to the man? This man's blind so that I can fix it.
Yes.
How many times do we get so low that all we can do is cry out to God?
Yes, sir.
See, that's not God's plan. God's plan is for us to be walking with Him in the garden all the time. But even when we are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, we need not fear any evil. He is the master and the God of even the disaster and the misfortune. Amen? We can rest in Him. Our last and final seventh sign. The seventh sign is in John 11. John 11, 1 through 44. This is very, very long. Very, very long. But let's cut to the chase, okay? We got a couple minutes left. Let's cut to the chase and say, this is the death and resurrection of Lazarus.
Good for you.
It's just, it's just the story teaches itself, doesn't it? Look at verse 11. Verse 11. Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of his sleep. In verse 14, he says, Lazarus is dead. You don't get what I'm saying. Yes, guys, he's not sleeping on his bed, having a nap. You're not getting it. When I said that Lazarus is asleep, I meant this isn't permanent because I'm here. But for those of you that don't get it, Lazarus is dead.
Did.
Okay? Oh, why didn't you say so? I did. You weren't listening. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go down to him. Again, here's that misfortune. You see, that which the devil means for evil, God means for good. Okay? And so we see that coming. So he comes and he resurrects Lazarus and brings him out, says, where have you laid him? What's going on? And all of this comes about so that it's the last and final, and remember 7 is perfection, as the last and perfect sign. Jesus now conquers death.
Amen to that.
He conquers death. If there was anything, let me just say this, if there was anything that frightened the authorities, can you think of anything that would be more frightening to the authorities than a man raising someone from the dead?
4 days ago, wasn't it?
At 30, yeah, down to 3.
I'm sorry.
And so he's a stinker. And so,
Yeah.
I mean,
Not a stinker.
that's what he says, behold, his stinker. And so, the rabbis and the chief priests and the Herodians and all of those who were against him could excuse a lot of things and say, well, magicians can do that. Well, magicians can do that. Well, there have been prophets who have been able to do that. There have been messiahs get up and down who have done those sort of things, right? I mean, Moses ran into that, didn't he? When he took his stick and threw it down, the magicians copied it. So throughout history, there's been counterfeits of the power of God. The devil can counterfeit what God does. But it's a lie. It's not real. And so here, once again, Jesus can kind of be put on the back burner. He's a kind of a whack, kook. Let's not worry about it. But when there is an entire town that has seen a man who has been dead for 4 days, who has been embalmed, has been wrapped, has been put away. Remember how the burial process of the Jews of this time was.
Yes.
That there was that anointing and that wrapping, and that for 1 year they lay in the grave. 1 year. And during that year, the flesh floats away and melts away, and what is left are the bones. And then we go back and get those bones, and we put them in the bone box, the ossuary, and we put them in the family box, where 4, 5, 6 people could be in the same box. We find out archaeologically that we can find 4 and 5 bodies in the same box. And so when the man said, I've got to go bury my father, I've got to go bury my father, and Jesus said, let the dead bury their dead, because he was not putting his father to rest because he died. He was going to get his bones and put them in a box. Jesus said, the bones will be there when you go. They're not going anywhere. Just cool your jets, those bones will be there. But come follow me. Am I more important, or your father's bones more important? You've already paid a tribute to your father when you buried him. You already said your goodbyes. Now all you're doing is cleaning house.
That means so much now that when you explain it.
Does that make sense? See, it's just cleaning house now. And Jesus says, why would you want to go clean a sepulcher rather than follow life itself? Why would you want to do that? And so John's 7 signs of the divinity of Christ. This mystic who's going to be taken into the future, and will see things that no human being has seen and will see in its completion. We see snippets of Revelation happening right now, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Don't we see prophecy being fulfilled?
Yes, sir.
Now, we may live to see it all fulfilled, and we may die, and our kids see the completion of it. Our grandkids might see the completion of it. It might happen. But there's one man who saw it from beginning to end and told it and wrote it. And it's the mystic John, who says, I'm on a different level with this Yahweh God. I'm on a different level with this Creator. That I am looking for the message behind the message. Yes, I hear what you say. But what does that mean? What does that mean? And when you get hungry about Jesus, and it's no longer just the ritual of going to church because you ought to, then aren't you finding out that you want to know what's behind it? What do you mean by that? How does that apply to me? You see, we're entering into the mystic side.
Amen.
More than the writing. I remind you just one final word, something we've taught many times, but a lot of people are new. But the two words that are used in the scriptures as far as us reading things is logos, the Greek word logos, which is to read. It's something which is written. It's to be understood. You can read something, not understand it, right? But logos means, okay, I get it. I've read it. I know what you're saying. But then we have the word rhema, which has the H, the pneuma, the ruach of the Old Testament. the life, the breath, the essence, the Spirit of God that was breathed into the nostrils of Adam, and he became a living soul. The pneuma, that and that's when the Word is revealed to us. We read it and read it and read it, we say, oh, is that what you're saying? Is that what it means? I've read this 3 times, and now I get this message from it. You see, that's going from the Logos to the Rhema, and that's going from the reading and obeying to the understanding of Scripture, to the walk ye in it, Scripture says.